Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Tara Panchwani, and I'm the Retail Sector and Policy Manager at the UKIBC, and I'll be your moderator today. In this webinar, we will discuss the recent retail policy developments and government initiatives that have taken place in the last 18 months since the NDA government came into power, namely the liberalisation of FDI in 15 sectors, including single brand retail, e-commerce, food processing and supply chains, and the new opportunities that have opened up for UK brands as well as food and drink and logistics companies. There are some real game changers that we're going to talk about today. So I will be passing it to Professor Mukherjee really soon. But before we begin, I would like to familiarize you with the toolbox on the right-hand side of your screen. Just to let you know, we will have everyone on mute during the course of the webinar to keep any background noise to a minimum. But if you have a question, please drop it into the little bracket on the toolbox to your right in the please type your question here box to send me your question, and I will take it up during our Q&A session at the end. For now, to make sure that you can all hear me clearly, could I please ask that you all use the raise your hand button on the toolbar? Could you please click the raise your hand button? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So yes, I'm delighted to welcome the renowned Professor Arpita Mukherjee, who is a visionary leader and highly respected researcher from ICRIER, who specializes in Indian domestic policy reforms, international trade, and bilateral and regional agreements, with a key focus on retail logistics, special economic zones, production networks, and infrastructure. Professor Mukherjee has actually worked very closely with the Indian government and policymakers in the EU, US, ASEAN, and in East Asian countries. Her research is a key contributor to India's negotiating strategies in the WTO and bilateral agreements. She's conducted various studies for international organizations such as ADB, FCO UK, OECD, the Italian Trade Commission, WTO, NASCOM, FICCI, the list goes on. Dr. Mukherjee also has a PhD in economics from the University of Portsmouth, UK. So she is a real expert in this field of Indian policy reforms. Today she'll be sharing her insights and unique understanding on India's complex yet dynamic retail, food and drink and logistics sector, and discussing the new policy developments that are major positive steps in the right direction for foreign investors. She'll also provide advice for UK businesses in accessing the potential of this market. So without further ado, I will pass it on to our expert speaker. Professor Mukherjee, over to you, please.
Good morning, everybody, and it's a real pleasure for me to speak at this webinar. As we speak, you have just recently had the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to the UK, a prime ministerial visit after a long time. Today, India is actually on a high growth trajectory, and if you look into all the global databases like the IMF databases, they have posed India to project that India will grow around 7.5% in the next year as compared to 6.3% for China. So there is a high growth projection for India. Although India's ease of doing business ranking is still much below the UK, it is improving, and in a single year, India has been able to move 12 places, and the Prime Minister wants to bring it up to 50. So that's a big job that he and his team has in hand for the next 2 years in terms of ease of doing business, and there are a number of policies which has now come into India, and the whole number of central and state governments are working together to implement this. This includes the Make in India policy, which largely looks into how to attract foreign investors to set up manufacturing base in India. The Digital India, how foreign companies can participate in the IT solutions in India, and Skill India. And when you look into the food, retail, logistic business, all of these policies have a focus area, which is the food business. This is because food and grocery accounts for around 60% of the Indian GDP, and almost 30% of the total consumption that the total consumption expenditure is around 60%, and almost 30% of that is on food and grocery. India is a market where there is a huge expense by people on food and grocery, and food and grocery also accounts for 60% of the retail sector, and organized retail is growing at a very fast pace. A huge amount of people are actually dependent on the agriculture. There is around 60% of the people that is still dependent on agriculture, 25% on the services. And one of the key aim of the government is to shift the people from agriculture into services, create quality employment in food logistics supply chain. And there are a number of avenues in which the government would like foreign participation to come in, because India as a market offers a huge raw material base for agricultural commodities like milk, mangoes, bananas, but large part of this market remains untapped, and some of these products are not of processable quality, and there is a huge wastage. So these are some of the thoughts behind attracting private and foreign investment. Now, more recently, just prior to the UK visit, the Prime Minister announced a FDI liberalization in 15 sectors, which include single brand retail and e-commerce. Now, although India is one of the few countries, in fact probably the only country to have a brand-based retail policy, which somehow confuses the foreign retailers and manufacturers, the government has tried to bring some kind of a synergy across policy and facilitate liberalization within the existing political situation. The political situation in India is that there is a huge opposition to allowing foreign retailers in food and grocery retailing particularly, because of the perceived adverse impact that they may have on domestic mom and pop stores. So this has been a big debate which is going around for the past 10 years, and because of which the government is very worried about opening up multi-brand retail. However, as a part of the Make in India campaign, what the government has now allowed is that if a company has a manufacturing unit in India, it can sell its product through different routes. So therefore any foreign manufacturer can actually vertically integrate its operation into retail. A number of foreign retailers actually have selected the route. They have actually set up small manufacturing unit, and from there they are entering into different modes of retail. And in India, if you see, the non-store retail formats is picking up in a big way, and many of them had asked for easier access to non-store retail formats like e-commerce, and in the current policy the government has allowed that. So if you are a manufacturer and if you have a manufacturing unit in India, there is no restrictions on online sale to consumers. The second thing the government is doing is to come out with a very streamlined e-commerce policy. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, you will be seeing certain papers coming out with respect to e-commerce and foreign e-commerce retailers. Like that would have some implications for companies like Amazon. Now, coming to the specificities of single brand retail. One of the key problems, the single brand retail policy allowed the single brand retailer that for each brand you have to take an approval to enter the Indian market, but once you enter, you have to do a bit of local sourcing. Now, previously this local sourcing began when you bring in the FDI, but now the government has said that no, you can start your local sourcing after you set up your first store. So therefore, there is some relaxation on the local sourcing condition. Second and most important liberalization is coming for the consumer durables or high-end electronics, because the government says that if it is a cutting-edge technology or if it is a high-end product, you can actually then do away with the sourcing condition. Now, in food and grocery, that does involve high technology in processing and packaging, but how you actually put a food product in terms of high technology is something that one needs to really think about. And if they are able to successfully put that, they may be able to circumvent the domestic sourcing condition. The other thing that the government tried to do is to allow the single brand retailers to opt for e-commerce route. This is a big thing because now Marks and Spencer or IKEA, who has been choosing the single brand route, can now sell online, which is a very, very fast growing market in India. Now, the other thing is that companies like Marks and Spencer, the core issue that they would face is that they were worried about the product sourcing and online retailing, and many of them had not entered into the food and grocery business. Now, these are the points which the government is trying to rectify and work upon, and bringing in the GST next year so that, company diversify their operations from, say, clothing to food and retailing. So this is also in line with the government's Make in India campaign. The other thing that the government is helping out, which can be beneficial for both the foreign retailers and domestic retailers, is that there is a very easy FDI norm for Indian brands. So you can actually now purchase an Indian brand, and that kind of helps you to penetrate the market as well. Now, when it comes to the previously a single entity, now they have also allowed a single entity to do wholesale trading and single brand retailing. This is again a very, very interesting point, because you can then set up the entire supply chain, and but you need to actually compile by the conditions for wholesale and compile by the conditions of single brand retail, which are slightly different from each other. And there will be more synergies when you operate across products like furniture than when you operate across products like food and grocery, because food and grocery, the wholesale is very, very open policy, but single brand has certain continued restrictions like 30% domestic sourcing. Now, for doing so, the businesses has to have the two arms separately. I mean, basically, they have to keep two accounting systems. They have to ensure that they follow the respective regulations, but they can have an integrated market operations, which enables them to actually invest in storage, warehousing, and other activities. Now, coming to the most interesting part of the policy is that it allowed duty-free shops in custom-bonded areas. And when they talk about the duty-free shop, the government has not mentioned whether it is single brand, multi-brand. So any shop, any retailer can be in a custom bonded area, which means that not only you can now operate in airports and other custom areas, you can operate in special economic zones, export-oriented units, and all of these other areas, which is termed as custom bonded. Now, why did the government try to do it? Because the government is very keen to develop economic corridors and economic zones. And some of these big zones like Mahindra World City, SEZ near Chennai, these are like SEZs which have IT, which have manufacturing, which have housing. These will be the hubs where they would like to try out the entry of foreign retailers, as has been done in countries like China. And this would be something of a big bang reform if, the foreign retailers are able to strategically locate themselves in those large SEZs, because large SEZs create a huge amount of demand. For example, in Mahindra World City, Infosys alone has 17,000 employees. So you can just imagine if there is one food and grocery store, the kind of demand that it would create. Now, if you read, the government also has made certain other liberalization, and if you kind of look at it in isolation, they look, they don't look that great, but when you read it all together, it kind of gives a link between the SEZ policy, the construction policy, the real estate policy, as well as the retail policy. And I would strongly request you to actually go through the recent press note that is released by the Indian government, and there is a lot of liberalization in terms of FDI in limited liability partnership through the automatic route. This would be benefiting sectors like constructions. Now, SEZs have been given certain priorities. Like if you are developing an SEZ, there is no lock-in period. They have made easier entry and exit conditions. So the construction sector has been given a lot of boom, and the government is looking into smart city projects, zone developments. And the government is also looking at SEZs as a medium to help India to develop the production networks and value chain. The few more reforms that the government is planning to do, it depends upon how the current winter session and the budget session goes, will lead to where the government wants to give service tax exemptions into the SEZs. The government wants to give the best FTA tariffs to the SEZ when they access the domestic tariff area. So today, if you are selling from SEZ to the DTA, if you are facing an autonomous tariff of say 14%, if this best FTA tariff is given, you may even sell it to the Indian domestic tariff area at 0%. That would be a real big boon for companies which locate in the SEZ. The government is also giving certain other fast-track clearances, and these are largely at the state level, but at the state level, a number of Japanese companies have tried this out. European companies have not tried it, but if they come together in the form of an MSME cluster or something, if 15, 16 companies come together, the state government is working with them to actually help them to get the best land around the economic corridor and kind of build their own cluster development. That has happened in Neemrana in Rajasthan, and it is also happening closer to Andhra Pradesh in the Vizag-Chennai corridor. Now, where are the real opportunities for the UK companies? UK companies today, and we have an opportunity both in terms of across the supply chain, in manufacturing, in services, as well as in agribusiness, because the government very recently have opened up the tea plantation and also is allowing foreign investment in horticulture and in basically flowers, fruits, and vegetables. So these are the areas that has been opened up for investment by foreign companies, and these are the areas where UK companies can look into in terms of setting up the supply chain and sourcing networks. A number of areas where the government has identified where they would encourage technology to come in from the UK, which includes clean technology, energy saving technology in warehousing, storages, automated warehouses, in terms of temperature, multiple temperature control in storages and maintenance of temperature, because in India the storage doors get opened very quickly. So that is one area where the government would like more collaborations with the UK companies in development of cold storages using renewable technology, like cold storages developed on solar technology. There are other areas like where the government would need better technology where UK can collaborate is tracking and inventory management. A lot in packaging technology like green packaging technology, recycling, environmental friendly packaging, in brand development, in actually getting the product of international standards, product approval processes. There is a lot of scope for collaboration in R&D, and Indian Geeta has already set up a project, and the government is running a project in private-public partnership with the UK government, where the Indian counterpart would put in a certain amount of money and UK would put in a certain amount of money, and this money would be given to SMEs in India and UK who will be going for commercialization of the product. So they have already done the research and they have reached a stage where they want to commercialize the product and they are unable to do so. That's when the government of the two countries pitch in and identify some of the key projects for funding. There is also scope for collaboration in skill development, because skill development is now a key component of the Indian government strategy as well as a part of the Corporate Social Responsibility Act given by the government. In the skill development, there is scope for UK companies to contribute to training of the trainers. There is scope for training. There is scope for investment in Indian institutions like the ITIs. And there is a scope for online package and program designing. Now, why are some of the UK companies worried? Because they don't know which state to come in, and finally in India much of the policies are at the state level. So it is very important to identify the right states for entry. There are states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, they are coming out with very, very vibrant policies and which are laying red carpets for the foreign investors. And even Karnataka has come out with recently with a very nice industrial policy. So I would strongly recommend that you actually look through the different states' industrial policy documents and then select the right states that fits your entry strategy. Identify your right partner if you want to come into the India, right location, and try to be in a location which is either very close to your production point. You select a production hub like a Sri City, or along the Delhi-Bombay corridor, or Bangalore Chennai corridor, or Bangalore-Bombay corridor, or you look at a consumption hub. So, you know, the light, just don't go by which government is giving cheap land. It's very important to identify where the land is located, and then also decide on your correct mode of entry. Now, these will be crucial points for you to come in. There are certain, a huge amount of tax reforms are underway, and one of the tax reforms are related to retrospect tax. And given the Vodafone case, the government Prime Minister has already announced that this will not happen in the UK. So that's something which will give some peace of mind to the UK businesses. The government has also is also looking very seriously into the possibilities of actually giving the MAT exemptions to the SEZs, the DDT, distribution dividend tax, and other exemptions to the SEZs which were withdrawn. The SEZs are also asking for service tax exemptions, and the government is trying to look at that issue as well. So in a holistic situation, there is a lot of things that are in the pipeline, and the government is going to introduce the GST bill in the next session. So as we wait for the winter session, there is a lot of opportunities for the UK companies. I would also strongly suggest that, during the course of our study here in India, we have come across that, there are a lot of collaboration that is happening through UK IBC, which is working very closely with UKTI, Indian government, Indian companies. And I think that, if you, some kind of working between the companies, or sometimes the companies do have a bad experiences because they try to do things on their own. It will be a good idea to go through the UK IBC or the UKTI and look through the, have a more holistic approach to how we take the reform measures forward and how they can benefit from the reform. Last but not the least, I would like to point out that India is in a good buoyant state, and we hope to see some more development in the next few months, and I do hope that UK companies will find this as an interesting market to invest. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Mukherjee, for that excellent overview and those useful insights. The news about the liberalized special economic zones, which are free of restrictions for foreign brands, is particularly good to hear, as well as the allowance for single brand retailers to enter the e-commerce space. So I think these are some really game changer policies that will make it much easier and much more attractive for UK brands and UK food and drink companies looking at India. I will now open the floor to some questions. I'm just going to check if we have any questions yet. Okay. So I actually have a question to kick off. And that is, you mentioned GST as part of your discussion, and we actually did a survey. The UK IBC did a survey very recently before Prime Minister Modi came to the UK of all our UK companies, and the survey identified GST as the single most important reform that would have the biggest impact for these companies in India. And I was just wondering, what do you think is the real likelihood of GST coming, being passed in 2016? Is there some insider knowledge that you have that you could just share on that?
The government, this is one of the top priority. In fact, this is the most top priority area of the current government to get the GST passed. The problem that the government has is now, they do not have enough they do not have enough numbers in the Rajya Sabha. So even if they get it past the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of the parliament, they are worried about the Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house of the parliament. But to the best of my understanding, the government is trying to enter into some kind of consensus with some of the like-minded political parties and get the smaller groups together to get the GST passed. Because at the end of the day, GST, every political party is aware that GST is the single biggest reform in India, but nobody wants to give other the credit to implement it. So that's the reason. It's not like ideologically Congress is opposing it or, BJP is supporting it. It's only the matter of that, nobody wants the other person to get the credit for the reform, but Mr. Modi's single most objective now is to get this done. So we hope that it will be done, but there is a bit of a concern, the numbers in the upper house.
Right. So it's about allocating credit. And it's about internal struggles as opposed to looking at the big picture and the benefits of passing this reform. Yeah.
Yes, because whoever passes it, immediately, the benefits, immediately that government will see the benefit. It is, and it will benefit the Indian as a consumer, and the producers and the poor people will be the real beneficiary of this reform process.
Yes, no, absolutely. So they just need to think, sort of, look at the big picture rather than focusing on petty issues. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Do we have another question? Just 1 second. Okay, we have a question. I'm just going to read it out. And the question is, how, if at all, have the opportunities changed for small fine food, like gourmet food producers in the UK to sell into the Indian market? So specifically for sort of small UK SMEs in the gourmet food.
I got it.
Yeah.
See, the problem is that if you want to export your product into India from the UK, the policies have still not been very good in that matter, because in India is a high tariff country and there are issues related to the food safety regulations. So and there are issues related to labeling. So all the issues that an exporter was facing while catering to the Indian market remains, except the customs. The government is trying to streamline the custom processes so that the custom clearances are much more faster for the food, and because of the recent Maggie case, which really projected India in the bad way, they are trying to resolve some of the food safety related issue, coming out with a more stringent regulation. But a small food producer in India today can look into, the only way in which the market opportunity has probably changed is that they can look into the market through different formats. Previously, it was in terms of export, they would face tariff. In terms of the other things, the issues remains the same. But in terms of accessing the market online, it has become much more easier. So if they actually partner an Indian e-commerce food company, or if they partner a foreign e-commerce company which is trying to enter India, that's where I think the accessibility to the market, once they enter the market, there are two things. One is how you enter the market, and once you are in the market. Once you in the market, in India it was an extreme difficult job to give your product visibility and the product being distributed across this large country. That problem has been resolved through the e-commerce route, which is developing well in food and grocery.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is that for a small fine food producer looking to export, the best plan is to partner up with a like-minded Indian partner in the e-commerce space.
Yes.
Yes. And then,
because it is a niche exporter, it also has to. In India, there are two grocery segments. One is a very high-end grocery segment has come up, like Nature Basket of Godrej. So there are few players which has come up. So that is a player that you need to target.
Yes.
So because this will not be a very mass consumption product, so so you have to target those kind of retailers for on-store retailing, and you have to target e-commerce companies like Big Basket and others. These people are doing very well in India.
Yes, and they also have the entire supply chain under their control. So they've got the distribution set up, they've got the customs clearance, so they can make it quite easy, or certainly much easier for UK exporters to get into the Indian market.
Yeah, and also they need to coordinate with Indian Importer Association, and Indian Importer Association is quite active in many areas.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee. Do we have any others at the moment? Okay. I have one more question. Actually, Professor Mukherjee, just to elaborate on what you said about locations and states. So certain states and certain locations are better to consider. You mentioned. Can you tell me, I think you were talking about previously that South India is a good place to start. Could you tell us some reasons why? I think you and I were discussing this before, and that might be quite useful for people to hear.
Yeah, because see, one of the reasons why businesses start in South India is because South India is very geared up to the organized mode of food and grocery retailing. So therefore, this has the highest percentage. If all over India around 8% or 3 to 4% of the retailing is organized food and grocery, in South India it is as high as 17 to 20%. So people there are more willing and accept to try out new models, and they are familiar with the model. So that is one of the concept, and they also are very keen to try out food, and they have because the IT sectors are located in hubs like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai. So these people are Pune. They are quite geared up to the brands. They know the brands, and they are aware of the things. So the brand visibility, the knowledge is easier. Many of these southern states have come out with a lot of reforms. Like for example, Karnataka, you can directly source. In Andhra Pradesh, you can directly source. So these reform measures are also important for the businesses to decide which state they would look into, and they actually compete among themselves to give you a good incentive for locating in the state.
Yes. No, thank you very much.
So these will be the right. These are on the grounds that I was selecting the southern state.
Yes. That you suggest Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Vizag, all of these areas. Am I right?
Yeah, because Andhra Pradesh, Chandrababu Naidu is very proactive. Karnataka has recently come out with a good policy. Maharashtra has a very good policy because Maharashtra is geared to export. See, you have to select places which are geared to export and import. Now, let me just give an example of West Bengal. In West Bengal, the problem is that the first thought of the government basic policy is that I don't like SEZ, I don't like FDI and retail. So the government's psychology is, not to help you out. So in that kind of a state, it becomes extremely difficult for businesses to actually invest. So therefore, the businesses find it easier to move around in a state which is more friendly towards their need.
Thank you very much. And since we don't have any more questions, I will ask one last question, Professor Mukherjee. If you can reiterate your top 3 tips for UK businesses to have successful interactions with Indian government officials, because I know that a lot of our companies face problems when they're trying to get approvals and trying to get, set up companies. They always have problems with local government interactions, and they have to wait a long time to get their clearances and approvals. Given how closely you work with Indian government, can you give some tips on how that can be addressed?
Most of the companies who try to come into India actually try to work through a consultancy firm, and many a times when you work through a and that's the problem of the Indian companies also. Many a times when you work through the consultancy firm, you can make mistakes. So it is the best way to actually look into it is to do a comparison of the state industrial policy. Industrial policies are for every state, it is online. So every state will have an industrial policy and a sector specific policy. So you need to actually see the industrial policy and sector specific policy and match it around. Then the investor friendliness and the level of access actually vary across states, and that is the like in the case of Andhra Pradesh, you will be very easily able to access. In the case of Gujarat, you will be easy able to access. But I would suggest that you look at the state level World Bank ease of doing business indicators, and that will exactly tell you which are the states which are easier in terms of getting what kind of clearances, and then that you have to match it up with your own requirements.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee, for all your valuable insights. That was really interesting, and it's only the tip of the iceberg, so we might do more of these going forward. Dear everybody, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope this webinar was really useful and informative for you. If you have any feedback or any further comments about today's session that you'd like to see us do in the future, please get in touch. Thanks very much for joining us. Before you go, I'd like to just tell you all that we are planning a food and drink trade mission to India in January 2016. That's the dates are 19th to the 22nd of January in Bombay and Bangalore. And basically it will, the program, the details of the mission are on our website, but it's a Northern Powerhouse mission. It's kind of led by Northern Powerhouse. There is funding available for UK companies that qualify for the criteria. It's about £900 per company if you qualify. And we will be actually visiting the Food and Grocery Forum in Mumbai, which is a major food and grocery event for fine foods as well as the more normal categories. So it kind of spans the entire spectrum. And we'll also be doing site visits as well as B2B opportunities, one-to-one meetings with Indian buyers, retailers, site visits to different retail stores and formats. So I think it'll be really useful for companies to actually attend this. So do let us know. Please check out on our website, and the closing date is Friday, 11th of December. So, and if you have any more questions, just drop me an email. Thank you very much.